Good afternoon and welcome to everyone joining us for today's Juris Feature Friday webinar featuring our guest speaker, Dwayne Carey, Senior Trainer for LexisNexis Juris. This month's Feature Friday webinar is Juris Suite Time Entry Tips and Tricks. My name is Dave. I'm a Marketing Associate here at LexisNexis. I will be your host for today's session. Feature Friday webinars are complementary to our Juris customers and have been designed to help you get the most from your Juris software by providing you with time-saving tips and best practices for using Juris. The format for today's webinar is the presentation provided by Dwayne, followed by a question and answer period. All of our attendees will be in listen-only mode for the duration of our presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them via the questions pane located on your webinar control panel. During the last 15 minutes of the webinar, Dwayne will answer your questions. Please note that we are recording today's event and all attendees will receive an email within 1 week with a link to the recording and any slides that Dwayne may use. Also, there is a brief survey at the end of our webinar today that we ask you to please take a moment to complete. Your feedback will help us in planning our future events. Dwayne, at this time, I will turn the webinar over to you.
Hi, thank you so much, Dave. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Feature Friday on the Juris Suite Time Entry Proficiency with Tips and Tricks. My name is Dwayne Carey. I am a Senior Trainer here at LexisNexis. Let's take a look at what we're going to take a look at today on this Feature Friday. So there we go. So this is kind of our agenda. So the idea of today is a lot of you might have been using Juris Suite for a while, or you may be new to Juris Suite, so this might be helpful as well. Chances are, though, you had Juris Suite implemented a while ago, and people may have come and gone since then, and there might be some areas of Juris Suite that you just haven't used before or not familiar with. And a lot of the information I'm going to probably cover in today's class, you may need to be an admin to access those features. So if you are not an admin, just take some notes and let your admin know about these features and then go and make these changes to hopefully speed up the time entry process. And what we're going to be looking at today is that big circle that you see on the screen. We're going to be looking at what are teams in Juris Suite, some of the permissions we can set in Juris Suite, access to different fields. There might be fields when you do your time entry that you just don't need, and they're just that split second you got to tab over or skip over that you just want to get rid of it. So we can change that field access. Some compliance rules, how we can set up some rules in Juris to make sure your time and expense entries are being entered in correctly. You can set up rules that'll flag entries that'll catch, like, I'll give you an example. I'll show you one of these rules today. That there's a blank narrative for whatever reason. We can capture that and let the timekeeper know, no, you got to fill in the narrative. And then finally, how we can change that grid layout as we're entering the time in, and how you can set up filters to show just specific types of entries on your screen. So as usual, if I've been on one of my webinars before, I do have more to the PowerPoint that I will not be showing on the Feature Friday itself because I'll be working in the software, but there are other slides that will be included at the end of the recording, so you will see that in my actual PowerPoint that you receive via the email. So with that, let me jump on over to Juris Suite. So here we are. I'm in Juris Suite. I'm looking at my transactions. And right now I'm logged in as the admin, as SMGR. And as the admin, I have access to pretty much everybody's time. So here we can see some time entries from this week, some from last month. They've been recorded but not actually posted yet. We can see I can see KAT's time, PTR's time, MAH's time. Pretty much have access to everything I need as I'm logged in as the SMGR in Juris Suite. But what we can do is you can set up different teams in Juris Suite so people can either view specific team members or specific timekeepers in Juris. So probably when you log in, more than likely you just see your own time. But what if you report to other attorneys or you enter in other people's time in the firm and you want to be able to see that that time got entered? Or maybe you're a partner and you just want to see time is being entered by your team. Well, there are different ways we can see that information, and that's using the concept known as a team in Juris. So the first thing we need to do, and again, you're probably gonna have to be an admin to have access to this. So if you can't access it on your own. Just let your admin know that's something they might want to consider if they're unaware of it. But we're going to go up here to the big Juris ball in the upper left corner in Juris Suite. We're going to click on that. We're going to go to admin. And first thing we're going to do is we're going to define our teams if we haven't already. So I click on define teams, pull up my teams. You can see I've got two teams in here. I've got a firm team, then I have an MAT team. So these are a couple teams that were already in the system. And you'll see when you create a new team, just click the green plus to create a new team. And I'm going to switch over here to the MAT team just to show you what it looks like. You're going to see there's some few tabs here in the center. You're going to have the team tab that shows you who's on this team. So on this team, I have a member of TLR, which is Timothy Randall. Patricia Ross is also a member. Kimberly happens to be a lead. And Mike Harrison is the manager of the team. Then you'll see we can break it out and we can add people as managers. We can add people as leads, or we can add people as members. So if you're added as a manager, and you can have multiple people on the team as a manager, it doesn't have to be limited to just one person. But if you're a manager on a team, then you have access to see all the other time information entered in by the other members of this team, and you can actually edit those time entries. So right now, Mike Harrison can see his own time. He can also see Kimberly's time, and he can see Timothy and Patricia's time. And he can also go in and, he can also go in and edit their time entries if need be. Leads, on the other hand, and this is Kimberly as the lead here, and you can have, again, multiple leads if you want. They can see the other entries by the members, but they can't edit the entries. So maybe a partner just wants to make sure their time or other people on the team's time is being entered and they want to be able to see that time, but you don't want them to be able to edit it. You can enter them as a lead at this point. So they can see the time, they just can't edit anybody else's time, only their own time, of course. You can always edit your own time if necessary. Members, on the other hand, they just see their own time and that's it. So they can see their time, but they can't edit or do anything else with those time entries. So you can create teams, so you can view and access other people's time without having to have a clutter of other people's time that you have no interest in and don't need to access. So at this point, logged in as SMGR, I have access to everybody. If I log out of Juris Suite, and I log back in, and I log back in as Mike Harrison, now I can see time entries, but I don't see everybody's entries. I just see the entries that I have for my team. Let me see if I got another layout here. Let me use that Juris layout. We'll come back to layouts a little bit later. But I can see those other entries for those other people that are on my team. So these are just the members of my team. Or if I logged in as TLR, I can see my other team members. I can access and edit my time entries if I need to. But you notice even though these are in draft stage, they're grayed out, which means I can see them, but I can't edit them. It won't let me make changes to it. So you can set up those teams to have someone who manages the team, who can have access to everybody's time entries or expense entries on the team. You can have people who can view the other team members as necessary. And then you just have the members of the team who generally just have access to their own time entries, and that's it. So set up teams to be able to easily track and look at the time entries you would like to see in Juris Suite. Now, teams are slightly different than setting up permissions. So some people will get those two confused and say, hey, I want to set up permissions. And teams are just for viewing and editing entries. If you actually want to set up permissions for different people, then you can set them up as groups. So again, I need to log out because I don't have admin access as TLR. So I'm going to log in as an admin. SMGR. And we'll take a look at the groups then. So if we go to the Juris ball again and go to admin, you had to define teams where we could set up who could view and change time entries. When you define groups, this is where you can set up and assign permissions to specific users in Juris. So if I look at my defined groups, right now here's my attorney group, Michelle, Mike, Bill, and Timothy. And I can again create additional groups. Here are all the timekeepers. I can enter those timekeepers into groups as necessary. And what this will allow you to do is assign blanket permissions to all these people at once rather than having to do it at an individual level. So once you've got your groups defined, go back up to the Juris ball admin, we can set up our group permissions. Click on group permissions. There's my attorney group. And if I expand out the attorney group, these are the different areas of Juris Suite that I can give them access to or deny them access to. And here, since we're concentrating really on time and expenses more than anything else, I could click on my time, my expenses. And then these are the different permissions I could give those members of the group. Just look through and determine, all right, what access levels do I want to give them in Juris Suite? And you'll see there's 3 settings: grant all, deny, and unset or not set. So if I hit the little drop down next to a permission, grant, of course, allows them to access that feature. Deny firmly denies them access to that feature. Not set, this just basically says if there's a permission somewhere else in Juris that'll allow them to access that feature, then we will give them permission to access. If there's another area in Juris that denies them access to that feature, then we will go with deny. So this is almost like a soft deny. There is a possibility they can still access it depending on a permission set up elsewhere in Juris Suite. But grant will give them access to that feature. Deny will take away that access. Not set just means somewhere else in the system they may or may not have access to that particular area of Juris Suite. So use your groups to group people together and assign permissions to them as necessary. And then based on that permission, they may or may not have access to certain areas of Juris Suite or even certain snap-ins in Juris Suite itself. Now, you will notice when I go back, especially if you're an admin on the phone, if I go to the Juris ball, admin, there's 3 sets of permissions. There's firm permissions, group permissions, and user permissions. Firm permissions, of course, is for your entire firm. And as you set those permissions, they cascade down to the groups and to the users of the firm. If you set a group permission, the group permission can override what you've got set up at the firm level. So the firm cascades down, but if you make changes at the group or user level, that'll override the firm. So group can override firm, and then user can actually override the group. So if you're part of a group and you have certain access to different areas of Juris Suite, but then go into the individual user of one of those groups and make changes to that access, this user change can overwrite or override what you have set up in their group level. So do keep that in mind when you set up permissions. It's possible you'll set up a group permission, but if someone's gone in and made changes to the individual users in a group, that might override what you had set up at the group level. So just do keep that in mind when it comes to permissions. So define your groups, and then once those groups are defined, you can define what permission and access they have in Juris Suite. So group access, what can they access in the system itself? But you can also, if you want to get really deep down, you can provide access to specific fields in Juris Suite itself. And that's with something called field access. Again, if you're not an admin, you probably won't see this button, but this is the button I'm talking about right here in Tools called Field Access. And you can access and set what access level I have to specific fields in Juris Suite. Because there may be times when there's information that your timekeepers just don't need to see. It's either none of their business or it really has nothing to do with them entering their time. So you can click on Field Access as an admin. and then just choose the user or timekeeper. The timekeeper you want to change access to. So if I choose Eugene Krabs, for example, over here are the different fields available to it. Activity code, it's active, so the whole firm can see it. But I can also say, well, for this user, they don't need access to the activity code, so I can either hide it or disable it or enable it, or just make sure it's active for them if they need it. So basically, when Eugene logs in, based on the selections I see here, is what he will have access to when he enters a time entry, maybe through this editor here. So right now I have access to hours worked, hours to bill, the rate, the fee amount. Well, I could go into field access. Let me choose Mike Harrison since I have his login info. And I just make sure that what I want is available to him. So hours worked here is active, so he can see that. Hours to bill, you'll notice for Mike, it's disabled. So he should not have access to this hours to bill field. Rate, it's hidden. So it's here, he just can't see the rate because quite honestly, Mike doesn't need to know the rate it's being billed at. And if we go up to fee amount, where is it here? I don't think he has access to fee amount either if I remember the settings. So basically you can go in and tell Juris, well, what access should my timekeepers have to those fields that they have access to? So again, if I now log out of Juris Suite, and I log back in as Mike Harrison, you're going to notice that's all he sees is hours worked. So the hours to bill is there. It's just disabled. He can't change it. The fees and everything are hidden, so he doesn't even see it. So you can control what access your users or timekeepers, I'm sorry, I keep saying users. I should be saying timekeepers. I apologize. You can control what access your timekeepers have to these different fields here in Juris Suite. So another example, if you've got timekeepers that have nothing to do with electronic billing, they don't need an activity code, for example, you could hide that activity code field if necessary. There's just one less thing they have to worry about skipping over, one less thing on the screen cluttering up what they're viewing. So use that field access, and you'll notice Mike Harrison doesn't even have access to that. So again, that is an admin function. So if you don't see the button, it's just you don't have access to that button. Talk to your admin. We can make sure if there's a field you don't see that you do need, they can enable it. If there's a field you see that you never use, just tell your admins you want them to disable that field for you. You don't need it on your form. You don't have any use for it. It's just slowing you down entering your time or expense. So that is the field access. And again, you have complete control over what your users see or do. The other thing I don't have access to here is Mike Harrison is the compliance rules. So if I log out of Juris Suite, log back in as my admin. Up in that upper right corner, instead of field access, I have what we call the rule designer. Here's where you can create compliance rules to make sure that your timekeepers are entering in time and expense entries the way you want them entered into Juris Suite. So I'll click on the rule designer. It'll take me in. You'll see I already got a couple rules inside the system. I have a rule for capital letters. In other words, anytime I enter a narrative must begin with a capital letter. I have one for time increments. When my timekeepers enter time into Juris Suite, they must be entered in 6-minute increments. We round to the nearest 10th. So you can create these rules that when your timekeepers enter time or expense into the system, you'll notice down below here in the bottom left, I can create for expense and or time entries that they follow these rules when entering their items into the system. So entering and creating compliance rule is pretty straightforward. So an easy one I could create is you're not allowed to have a blank narrative, either on a time entry or an expense entry. It's got to be filled in when you enter that entry in. So up here we got our new. If I hit the little down arrow, there's different types of rules. There's text rules, numeric rules, dates, etc. This one's pretty straightforward. I don't want an empty narrative, so this is a new empty field rule. So I click new empty field rule. I give it a code so I know what kind of rule I'm creating. Blank narrative. Give it a description so I know what type of rule it is. Get rid of that extra space. And then the instructions. So if one of my timekeepers violates the rule, they need to know what they did wrong. Just throwing up an error is not going to tell them anything. So tell them what they're supposed to do in the instructions. So this will be what your timekeepers will now know to do when they get an error. And now I just go down to the definition and I determine is it for expense or time entries or both. And I can just expand it out. This is an expense entry item. And I just check you can't have a blank narrative. You see, you can also do it for any of these fields here as necessary. Green checkbox lets me know I've created it for expense. Now I just pop open the time entry. I can collapse expense back down and say, and no blank narrative for time entries either. If you wanted to get really in depth, you can click on a scope and you can add specific reasons. So I could click on here, green plus, add a scope on when this doesn't come into play. In the upper right, I just choose the severity of this rule. In this case, it's an error. They have to fill in a narrative. I could make some of these required. So I could make it required there's no blank narrative instead of an error. Just depends on how you want to set up the rule. I could just throw up a warning. Now, the warning just says you're not supposed to have a blank narrative, but it would still let them enter the time entry. So warning, they can still enter the time entry and they could still submit it for approval if necessary. So just be careful of that. Or you can just set a message, we don't want blank narratives. It just depends on how you want this rule to be treated. Well, I want this to be an error. So if they don't have a narrative, I don't want them to be able to submit this entry until they fix that rule and put the narrative in. And then I just save that rule. Like I said, you could get really in depth on some of these. I could create like a text rule. And this could be, how do I want to call this one? Scheduling. So we'll just call it schedule. Pardon me, I am a horrible typist. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a rule. And it's going to not allow people to enter specific terms in the narrative for a few specific matters. Based on our setup with the matters, those cases, we're not going to bill them for these specific types of time items. So once I have that, it's just going to apply to time entries. So I can uncheck expense, just going to apply to time entries. And then what I can do is on the scope, now let's get to the definition first. Time entry, it applies to the narrative. And then I'm going to add what we can't see. I don't want to see anything that includes the word calendar in it, or the word calendaring, or the word schedule, or scheduling. So if it contains any of these words, calendar, calendaring, schedule, scheduling, it's going to fail the word. It's going to fail the rule. Once I have that set, I can now go to my scope. All right, why are you not allowing me to add that? Well, I should. There we go. Helps if I uncheck the global box, because global, of course, means it's going to cover everything. I need to uncheck global if I want to make it specific. So I can say if the client matter equals Avant Technologies, and it could be either all of Avant or just that specific matter, the general. And I could add additional ones as necessary. Let's say Genco. Actually, we'll do all of Genco. So you can actually create a scope. Most of the times, this time entry rule is fine. But for this specific client matter and this specific client, you're not allowed to use these particular time items. Again, just save your rule. Now, when you use these, let me go ahead and I can do this, I think, without logging back out. So I'm going to go in, create a new time entry. There it goes. I fill in the information, entering this for Mike Harrison. It's client 0200. Matter, I think there was 2 matters on them. Use the copyright matter. And down here, I put in the narrative. And I am just making that up. Put in my hours worked. All right, I did spell that right, I did. That should yell at me. Let's try 100. Well, I am supposed to get a violation of the rule. Let my rules real quick, make sure I did that right. Calendar, schedule, I spelled schedule right. Scope. I lost the other one because I didn't include it. All right, we'll do Genco. But it should have still worked. Make sure I did that right. Oh, it's still on Genco. Oh, there, now it is. That's what I was supposed to see. I just left out the matter. Is that narrative gives me the red X. And it tells me you are not allowed to enter scheduling items on this matter. And it's just because it detected the word schedule there. If I didn't have the word schedule in there, it clears the error and I should be fine. If I tried to create a blank narrative, and anytime you see the red X, all you do is hover over it and it tells you timekeeper, you need a valid timekeeper, we need to enter that information. That's what the compliance rules are for, is to make sure that your timekeepers are entering the information as required by your firm. If I put in my billable hours, I've still got this narrative as blank, and so that's what the red X is for. If I close out of this, if I try to send this across, it's not going to go in. It's because I've got the error, and you've got to fix the errors. So whenever you try to submit entries, if that pops up, you're just looking for that. So it can't be recorded. So I have to go in, fix the narrative. Attendance at court. As long as I've got it fixed, the red X goes away. I should be able to easy right click and submit that entry and record it. So set up different compliance rules for your firm. Usually the rounding to the nearest tenth is a standard compliance rule, capital letters. You could set up one to make sure, what other ones do we have? It really just depends on your firm. Whatever type of ways you want to track your time, make sure you set up the compliance rules to make sure your timekeepers are following those rules that you have set before them. So they're creating their time entries and submitting their time entries the way you would like to see them in the system. Next, your timekeepers may want to change their grid layout. Most folks, even though I did it through the time entry just for today's example, most folks are probably entering their time via this grid. It's got all the fields they need. I can change this to just show my time today. And if they want to enter their time, they just click in the blank line and fill in their information. So you can change the way this grid looks. You may see items there that you don't need. There might be columns you don't really need or use at all, or there might be columns you want to see that aren't currently being displayed. So what you can do is you can choose columns and create what you want to see. Right click up right above the column names and you can do a column chooser. The column chooser will pop up and you can drag this up if you like. These are the available columns in Juris that you can add to your grid view. So just scroll through the columns. If there's a piece of information you need, for example, you're using the code 1 field to track information, left click on code 1 and drag it and then drop it up in your column chooser. And you can of course expand it out and you'll be able to now add that information into your time entries. So just find the fields you need and add them as necessary. As an admin, what you can do, so again, if I right click above it, there's a layout chooser. And I've got a Juris Law Firm standard layout and a main layout. And you can actually create layouts for your firm and your timekeepers can choose those layouts as necessary. So I can go into this layout chooser, right click and say, you know what, I want to create a brand new layout. Click on new. I can rename it. Again, could type. Choose whichever firm layout I want to use, the new one. Now I've got a generic layout here. Now I can choose my columns. And I can actually say, this is what we need. We need to see the activity code for these people using this view. So I can add the activity code column. I need to see the task code. So let's pull the task code column in. I don't care about the entry key column. So left click and drag the entry key column out back into the column chooser. Again, you can, of course, left click and drag and drop and organize these columns as necessary. If you right click, you can auto fit columns. You can auto size rows. Auto size rows. You can best fit the columns. That way they should fit a little bit nicer for you. So set up how you want this information to look. Once you've got your new layout set up, you can then right click here, go back to your layout chooser, right click on the layout you've created, and you can copy that and copy that layout, copy to an employee, or just copy that layout to your team. So another idea of having the team is you can set up a layout for the different people on the team and then publish this layout to the team members. That way, it's not giving it to everybody at your firm if not all the people need to see this new layout that you've created. Or you can just copy the layout to use that as a basis of a new layout that you want to create. or just give it to a specific employee that has the same timekeeper needs that you have. So between changing the columns and creating your own layouts, you can actually customize what this is going to look like and make it a little bit easier for you to actually use Juris and get your time entered in as quickly as possible. You also have the ability to change your filters. So you're going to see up here, there is a section for filters. And there's actually a few different filters over here. Here's my time that I've entered today. Here's my filters. And then I can choose an actual filter that I want to use. Right now, I don't have a filter set. And you should have some basic filters already included with your copy of Juris Suite. So you'll see, for example, I've got a current summary of today. I could see it by client and matter. And I can say, all right, I just want to see my information for Avent Technologies for the general matter. And now sort that and just show me those time entries regarding that specific client and matter. That way I can make sure I got my time entered in correctly for that particular client matter. There's one for unsubmitted time that we've created. So I can see any time that I've entered, but I have not submitted yet. And you may or may not have that filter. If you don't, then you can create the filters yourself. And that's the idea of the edit filters function. Click on edit filter. Here are my existing filters. But you could create an unsubmitted time filter like we have here. You just give it a name and then tell it what you're looking for. So if the entry status equals draft, so I've entered it, but I haven't submitted it yet, it should pop up in this filter. If the entry status is ready to submit, or memorandum, or pending approval, or delegated, or rejected, these are all items that have not been submitted yet. You don't have to have it as detailed as this. You could have one that just sets to draft or ready to submit and not worry about the others. But by creating this filter, anytime you want to see, well, what time do I have outstanding that I forgot to submit? You'll then just be able to go up here and say, all right, I just want to see my unsubmitted time. Choose that filter and it'll pop up and just show you the time you have not submitted yet. So I log out of SMGR. And log back in as Mr. Harrison. Current summary. Oh, they didn't actually populate it. So you'll notice it's not here listed for this particular timekeeper. That's a nice lucky thing that they didn't do that for me yet. So I can either create the filter myself, or as the admin, I could go back in. And if I've already got a filter like that, oops. See if we can get this keyboard to cooperate. If I go back to my filters, I can highlight that filter and I can either copy it to an employee or to the team, or I can publish it to an employee to a team. So I will copy that to my team. Actually, let's publish it to the firm as well. That should, since he's part of that team, at least Mike Harrison should give me access to that filter. Yeah, I did it twice. I should have just done one and not copy. I should have just published. There's my unsubmitted time filter, and then it should filter out and show me all the different items that I have that are not submitted yet. So create filters to filter through your time for stuff that you have not submitted or whatever other types of time entries you want to look for. And there's firm. I can just look at me and look at my time entries or anything that I've got for my team. And then I will have different filters available based on my drop down. And last thing you can normally do as a regular timekeeper, generally you don't need your admin to do this, but if you click on the Juris ball, you can go to your own settings, My Settings. Once you're here under My Settings, you can go to the My Time, and there's different settings here for time entries. So I can have auto new settings. If it's set to true, it's turned on. If it's set to false, it's turned off. So when I create auto new entries, it will duplicate the client matter, the date, the task code, the timekeeper for me. So there are different settings here that you can customize on your own, things that you may want to see or not see. Again, you should have the ability to do some of this customization on your own. There is a slight chance you could be locked out of it, so just talk to your admin if you can't access the My Settings. But you should be able to do that to be able to duplicate some of this information. Again, to help speed up that time entry process. So I go back to my time entries, and I set this to auto new instead of just new. Now when I enter this information in, let me change this layout to the Juris standard layout. I pop this information in. See, hours worked to phone call. By turning on the auto new and setting it to auto new, and I go down the next line, it duplicates the timekeeper, the client, the matter, etc. So that will just save me time. I just jump over to hours worked, and I can change that. As a matter of fact, I could set this up that this is already up over here. So now I just tab over to hours worked. I can do the same with narrative. Point 3, file paperwork, tab, 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 tab. Get to the next section. 1.2, call with client. This time it was for client 0100, matter 1. So now when I tab down, it duplicates that information. Now I can quickly get that time entered in. And that can quickly get my time entered in. Even if I change the date now, say, oh, forgot to enter yesterday's time, put in yesterday's date, I can put in my time entries. And now it duplicates yesterday's date. So again, help speed up your time entry. Again, if this changes, not a big deal, put it in. And now I'm just tabbing away and getting my time entered in very quickly. So change the auto new features to turn this on, and then make sure this is set to auto new by hitting the down arrow and choosing it. That way it'll duplicate your work. If you don't want it to duplicate, then you can just set it to new, fill in the information. When you tab down, you'll fill in the client, the matter, instead of it duplicating for you. So those are some of the things you should be looking at in Juris Suite to help speed up the time entry process. Just making sure we've got all those teams set up, those groups set up, permissions set up. We're showing them the fields they need to see, removing the fields that are just slowing them down. Setting up any filters to filter what we're seeing. Set up the compliance rules to make sure our timekeepers are entering their time in the way we would like them to. Again, make sure that we have that consistency on our billing when we bill out our information to our clients. So with that, I will jump back over to the PowerPoint. Again, if you would like personal help, someone to come on site or consult with you, we always have our Juris Professional Services team available to you. They can come in, work with you, help set up compliance rules with you if you would like, help set up the layouts with you if you like. So if you would like help doing that, do not hesitate to contact our Juris Professional Services team. If you're just looking for education on Juris, then you can check us out at LexisNexis University. We have some on-demand videos for Juris. We have some virtual training. So if you have a user new to Juris itself, or to Juris time entry or Juris Suite time entry, and you just want to have them sit down in a class, we can do that virtually as well. And we periodically offer classroom training as well. So with that, I thank you all for your time today. And at this point, I will kick it back over to Dave to see if we have any questions that have popped in.
Thank you, Dwayne, and thanks so much for your very informative session. I think our folks got some early Christmas shopping in. We don't have any questions this afternoon, but I wanted to ask if you wanted to add a couple of closing remarks, maybe any year-end information you want to pass along. If not, then I can just close out right now.
Just in case anybody does want to type in a question real quick, we'll give them a minute or two. I'm always happy to talk. Yes, you're getting ready to close out the year. If you're unfamiliar with the closing process, please don't hesitate to contact either the Juris Professional Services or check out our university. We should have some classes on helping you close out the year in Juris, making sure you generate your 1099 forms that you need to send out, and then making sure your books are ready for the coming year of 2018, making sure your accounting period is set and you've created the new accounting year. All that good stuff. If you're familiar with it, that is awesome. If you want a refresher, check out our university. If you're brand new to the whole process, and again, you can check out the university, or again, you can consult with someone from the Juris Professional Services team, who will be happy to make sure you guys are good to go for end of year and prepared for your new year of 2018.
Okay, well, in the interim time, we did have a couple of questions come in. Suzanne has a question. Is there a way to set a rule for automatic spell check?
I get that question all the time. Not at this point. That is something that I know the Juris developers are aware of. And again, I will follow up with them after the call. I'll send a little note over. We don't have an auto spell check rule. Let me just double check my emails as I'm talking. I'm pretty sure I've asked about this several times, and it's just not possible as of yet. But I just want to verify. I know exactly who I want to look for because there's just one person on the Juris team I correspond with regularly. But I don't believe we have that capability as of yet. But that is something I believe we have looked at quite a few times. So at this point, no, we don't have the ability to do an auto check, because basically it should automatically check that you have a misspelled word in Juris Suite as you're typing it, but there's no rule that we can set to say that, hey, by the way, you've got a misspelled word. But I believe that is something we're looking into. So I will follow up with the developers to see where we are on that. And hopefully we'll see that as an update to Juris in the future.
Okay. Colleen wants to know, how can we have time filtered for each timekeeper to show all unsubmitted time versus just today's time?
It should. Let me go back here. Yeah, I know. Cancel out of that. Problem with having 3 monitors is making sure I click on the right one. Let's go back to this. So if I look at my, I can't do it from here. Let me log back in as my admin. All right, so if I set my filter now to unsubmitted time, it's just letting it today's. Let me double check. Do I have the possibility? There's not a. For some reason, I thought it did it automatically. Unsubmitted time. If creation date is equal to or less than today, and entry status is equal to draft. Now, do I want creation date? Let's say not creation date. Let's say entry date. So if entry date is equal to or less than today, and entry status is draft, save that rule. Unsubmitted time for, give it a name, all time. Save. If I choose that, that should be all you need to do. You'll see here's all my unsubmitted time from earlier this week. So you just need to add a line in there telling it to look for information that is less than or equal to today's date, and that should capture backdated time that has not been submitted yet. So again, just so you can see it, if I go to my edit filters, so for all time, it's just I made sure if the entry date was less than or equal to today, but you could have it prompted or you can choose something else. But it's less than or equal to today's date and it's in draft mode, or you could add those other possible statuses as well. It should be able to pop it in. You just have to have some kind of date in the rule. My other one was just looking at today's date. That's why it didn't pop up anything earlier. So I'll have a date in there as well. If I added that date and entry date is less than or equal to today and save that rule, that should also pop that stuff up when I choose that specific rule. Well, I'll have to play with that rule. You should be able to do it, just include the date in there. Not sure why my rules are being a little tricky, but you'll see it is possible to do that.
Okay, Colleen has a follow-up to that. She states, but the system defaults to today's time. If this is the case, I would have to have each timekeeper change their filter, correct?
So you've already got a filter that just does defaults. I believe if I leave that there and save that as my filter, and I exit Juris, I'm logged in as, who am I logged in as now? MAH, I think so. Unsubmitted for all time, and I log back in. If I remember correctly, or maybe it was SMGR, it should remember the last filter I used. If you use that filter last, it should remember that filter and use it the next time you log in, so you don't have to select it yourself. It should remember your last filter. So if you never change it, it should always be your default filter. So hopefully, if that still doesn't answer your question, Colleen, please let us know. But I believe it should remember your filter. Just set it up as your filter, and it should, unless you change it, that should be the filter it opens up to each time.
Okay, as we wind down here, feel free to ask any question you have via the questions pane located on your webinar control panel. Hey, I see Colleen is still with us, and she asked this, but is there a way to make a filter a system-wide default?
I don't believe I can set it up as a system-wide. I think you'd have to create it, publish it to everybody, and they would have to select it. I don't believe there's a place that I can set that as the default filter, because here there's not really many settings at the firm level. So it's not going to be there. It's not going to be under permissions. Colleen, I don't believe you can create it and then make it a firm-wide setting. I think you can create the filter, publish it to everybody, then they'll have to each individually select that to be their filter. Yeah, I can't think of a way to have it automatically default to everybody. You can publish it to everybody, but they're gonna, each individual timekeeper is gonna have to select that to be their default filter going forward. If you would like, Colleen, send us an email at, I'll pop it up on my screen, hang on. It's gonna be LN as in LexisNexis training at lexisnexis.com. With that question, I will double check, but I do not believe there is a way to default that to the entire firm. But if you want to submit it to me here, I can double check and follow up. And if I get a different answer, I'll be happy to email you a different answer. Same with, I don't remember if it was Colleen who asked or if it was someone else. If you still have that question about the spell check, feel free to shoot the email to us at lntraining@lexisnexis.com. Just somewhere in the subject line, just say Juris Feature Friday or Juris FF. It'll get forwarded to me since I did it for this month, and I will follow up with you individually. But I do not believe the spell check is a rule we can implement just yet. And I don't believe we can publish those filters and make them a default. But if you want to follow up with me, just to be sure, email me here. I will check with the developers and I will get back to you if I have a different answer.
Okay, thank you so much, Dwayne. That concludes today's webinar, and I'd like to thank Dwayne once again for his expert advice on today's topic, and to all of our attendees for taking time out of your busy day to join us. Just have a few quick follow-up reminders. All attendees will receive an email within 1 week with a link to a recording of today's webinar, as well as any slides that Dwayne used. In closing, there is a brief survey at the end of our webinar today that we ask you to please take a moment to complete. Your feedback will help us in planning our future webinars. Thanks so much for your time today, and I hope everyone has a great weekend.